Self-harm is behavior that's self-directed and deliberately results in injury or the potential for injury to oneself. And this can be categorized as suicidal and non-suicidal. It's interesting, this isn't an area of my specialty, but what I've read about it is that for instance, self-harm, like kids that cut on themselves, that kind of thing, it's really an American cultural thing. It's really Western. In Japan, teenagers don't do that and haven't. They also don't prescribe a lot of antidepressants in Japan either. And so there's some things about how and what things come up that really are about social constructs. So I think that there's a bit of contagion in who else is doing it. There's also thoughts about an endorphin release. So kids that self-harm, that somehow that pain and cutting kind of creates a reinforcing cascade of things in their brain that reinforce that. But it's interesting how related it is to culture, though, that that isn't happening in other cultures like it does here. Most often, self-harm lacks suicidal intent. My experience working with teenagers that have self-harmed, they really didn't want to kill themselves. But it was something, there was just a different mechanism there. Except kids that do self-harm are also more likely to commit suicide. Do you have self-harm or cutting happening in your schools? What's the strategy around that? Teach me a little bit now.
We had a student that was cutting, we had student that was cutting, and we had found out because she was very open about it to other kids. So it's actually happening now as we're in the process of, I apologize for being on my phone, but we're in the process of kind of investigating, working with her parents on, how long has this been going on. So some things that we've been talking about is like the why behind it. So why is this going on? How long has this been going on? We talked about, when do you do it? When does this occur? What's triggering it? We're trying to help the student figure out what's triggering it so that we can kind of treat that.
Yeah.
Because it could be whether is a student depressed or something, rumors going on, and they want to take it upon themselves to try to stop that hurt.
Yeah.
So right now we're in the investigative stage of it, but really just finding behind the why and what triggers that action is what we're looking at right now.
So one of the things that when you read about what works with this and the kind of prevention programs that have been implemented across school systems is that most of them have an educational component that includes schools doing some education around depression and anxiety and stress management. So that what you're doing is you're laying a foundation by doing that so that it becomes, kids have language and a vocabulary to talk about it. They also then can recognize it in peers because peers have a greater influence. So it's not just about educating about the problems, but about problem solving and getting help and solutions and, the negative aspects of that. Yeah.
A lot of what you've talked about today in terms of protective factors, in terms of emotional regulation, dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, is something that in the Ann Arbor area is key for addressing self-harm. So just knowing that a lot of what you've covered earlier in developing skills, in developing specifically skills for emotion regulation is huge. In dealing with self-harm.
Yeah, and DBT is, and the skills associated with that are actually a set of skills that are kind of common across most therapies that work. So they're the skills that teach using your breath, to manage anxiety. So it's progressive relaxation, deep breathing. It's also identifying emotions, learning to identify. Sometimes kids don't know the difference between being a little bit mad and a lot mad, or a little bit sad. Sometimes they've missed a piece of development, and this isn't just trauma. This is if they're a family or raised in caregiving systems that don't talk emotions, they don't have emotional vocabulary. So creating emotional vocabulary and then teaching the problem-solving skills, which is what DBT is. Problem-solving, communication. So there are, I am sure, there are curriculums for schools about like how to focus on skills and illustrate them and develop them across different, but that's the public health intervention that works, is the early education and prevention. The sad thing is we don't live in a world that invests in early education and prevention. And when they do, then sometimes it gets dumped on schools without the, adequate resources to do that or training. But that's what works. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Missed you before.
No, that's okay. I've been aware of the cutting, for a few decades now that I've been in education, but something last year that I had an experience with in my classroom for the first time was erasing. They're now, erasing and burning, literally burning their skin off, and some in large patches. And you talked about the contagion factor, and one of my students did that, and next thing I knew, another one of my students was doing that as well. I recently saw that it's becoming an issue. I saw it online and read an article about it, but there are many different ways that they're self-harming, and I thought it was very interesting. The one student who I noticed first was doing that, she literally said she just wanted to erase herself. So it was that whole idea of not even wanting to exist, and what a sad thing for a middle school kid to feel that way.
Yeah.